slaughtering civilians, abusing hostages.
The situation in Gaza has reached a dangerous new low.
ولا هجرة من الضفة. لا هجرة من غزة.
How did it get to this? It's a conflict lasting 100, if not 1,000 years, over land, who lives on it and who controls it, in a part of the world where holy sites and religious landmarks are everywhere. You could choose any point in history to try to begin to explain the wider conflict, but to try to understand what's happened in the last 2 weeks, you could do worse than start by looking at the early 2000s.
An Israel-Palestine two-state settlement, that almost came off in 2000.
Each side has much to pay if there is a failure, if there is no success.
But it didn't, and everybody shifts from the focus of let's create opportunities for cooperation, and everybody gets tough. So the Israelis, on the one hand, pull their settlements out of Gaza and they concentrate on the West Bank.
That left the question of who would control Gaza, and a Palestinian power struggle began.
Hamas was making inroads, and eventually they toppled the Palestinian Authority government in a military coup d'etat. They killed their own Palestinian comrades.
In 2007, Hamas cemented power in Gaza. Israel, along with Egypt, imposed a permanent blockade.
Its land, sea and air borders are all tightly controlled. So essentially, nothing goes in or out, goods or people, or it's very severely restricted.
All of a sudden, the Israeli government has got a group which is in charge in Gaza, which now has enough influence to be saying, we don't believe that we can accept a two-state solution with Israel.
Now, Hamas ideology is religious. They don't recognize the right of Israel to exist. For Hamas, the land belongs to the Muslims.
The seeds of recent days were being sown. Some of Gaza's teenagers of then are some of their grown men of now, and they have seen nothing but Hamas rule and Israeli blockade.
أطفالنا تربوا بل ترعرعوا على سماع دوي الانفجارات على الصواريخ لا يتحدث لسان حالهم إلا بالسلاح والتدريب والأمور هذه.
The result politically was that governance of the Palestinian territories was split. Hamas ruled blockaded Gaza, while the internationally recognised Palestinian Authority, controlled by Fatah, oversaw the West Bank. But Israel doesn't recognise the borders of the West Bank, and many political groups in Israel believe the land there should be part of a Jewish state. As a result, within the West Bank, Israel asserts control and occupies a huge area known as Area C, where Palestinian movement and development is restricted.
Across the West Bank, there is really total Israeli control. When you take into account the fact that Area C is 60% of the West Bank, and that the Israeli army actually controls all the exits and entrances, they can set up checkpoints whenever they like.
At the same time, Jewish people living in illegal settlements in Area C and increasingly powerful elements in the Israeli government believe it's their obligation to defend and expand Jewish presence in areas where Palestinians remain.
What they want is simply to expand settlements. They were saying it was given to the Jews by God, and therefore the Palestinians in the West Bank should be either expelled or live with citizens without rights, without political rights.
Such extreme views are held by a minority in Israel, but have gained disproportionate influence in politics through junior partners in the current coalition government. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been propped up by ultranationalist Zionist parties. The formation of his coalition a year ago coincided with a further increase in violence between Israeli and Palestinian communities in the West Bank, as ministers led marches into illegal settlements and also into Al-Aqsa Mosque.
And they've allowed for these very provocative visits by Israeli settlers who advocate for the destruction of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so that's why when we hear of ministers invading the Al-Aqsa compound with a huge group of armed security personnel, it's a massive provocation.
With all this going on, the tension has been growing in the West Bank, and that has had an impact on the focus of the Israeli security forces, with tens of thousands of soldiers drawn to the West Bank as clashes and violence increased there, all while Gaza remained relatively quiet. But another horror was brewing.
It's different this time because Hamas decides we're going to go in and we're going to make a show of this in terms of what we can do to the Israelis. They go into the civilian settlements. They go into the kibbutzim, they go into gatherings such as the music festival, and they carry out mass murder. And we need to call this out for what it is.
The Hamas military plan was called Al-Aqsa Floods, after the mosque in Jerusalem.
It was an intelligence failure, a military failure. People were hiding in shelters and crying for help, and the military did not arrive.
Israel, a state built on projecting strength to hostile neighbours, has been rattled, and the world has been horrified. Israel cut power and water supplies to Gaza, bombed hundreds of locations, levelling buildings and killing civilians. Organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières say hospitals in Gaza are overwhelmed. UN officials say an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe is unfolding before our eyes. For days, Israel has been saying it's going to enter Gaza. It says to destroy Hamas. This is the population density map. Everyone living above this line was told by the Israeli military on Friday to evacuate south. 1 million of the 2 million people living on the Gaza Strip, half of which are children. If it were to enter, that would raise the prospect of a regional war. Like Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon is backed by Iran. Many, not least the Irish peacekeepers based in southern Lebanon, will be asking, what will Hezbollah do if Israel moves on Gaza? Iran has warned that entering Gaza will result in a response. What does that mean? And if Israel doesn't enter, what will it do instead?
At this moment, the people of Gaza, and to an extent, civilians in Israel, are hostages. They have been hostages of Hamas, which has used the Gazan population as a human shield against attack by Israel. To an extent, people in Israel have been held hostages by the Israeli government, which to an extent has been negligent or served other interests. I'm not sure how we get there, but the agreed position has got to be that Hamas has got to go as the leadership in Gaza, but Netanyahu has got to go in Israel.
Historically, in this conflict, getting to any agreed position has been difficult, but the absence of any such agreement is daily cutting short people's lives. And the fear is, in a conflict lasting 100, if not 1,000 years, that this period could, horrifyingly, stand out.